Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Mr. Rogues. In this video we explore the history of the living Jekyll and Hyde himself, Two-Face. It's time to take a look at the complete history of that split-faced fiend, the Duke of Duality himself, Harvey Dent, better known to the world at large as Two-Face. In 1942, Bob Kane, co-creator of Batman, was inspired by the classic story The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde to create a brand new villain for the Dark Knight. This would be a villain who, much like Jekyll and Hyde, was split between two sides, one good and one evil. Inspiration was also taken from pulp character The Black Cat, a district attorney who became a crime fighter after getting his face splashed with acid by a criminal. Bob Kane presumably took these ideas to Bill Finger, the writer of the Batman comics, and Finger then supplied the world with the very first Two-Face story. It was called The Crimes of Two-Face and was published in Detective Comics 66 in August of 1942. In the story we meet Harvey Kent, heroic and dashing district attorney of Gotham City. With the help of his friend Batman, he was able to bring notorious racketeer Boss Maroni to trial. The instrumental piece of evidence in the case being Maroni's good luck charm, a two-headed silver dollar. It was found at the scene of a murder with Maroni's fingerprints on it. Angered and desperate, Maroni produced a hidden vial of acid and threw it at Kent. Due to Batman's quick intervention, the acid struck only half of Harvey's face. To heal the scars, Harvey underwent plastic surgery, and 1 month later the bandages were discarded. To his horror, the surgery was a failure, and Harvey was now horrifically disfigured on one side of his face. His visage split between handsome man and hideous monster. The poor sap was subsequently shunned by society for his half-ugliness. Even his own beloved fiancée, Gilda, reacted in horror at the sight of his mug. She, a renowned sculptor and admirer of great beauty, could no longer stand to even look at him. As a result, Harvey snapped. He abandoned his own life and instead joined the only part of society that accepted him, the ugly side of society, the criminal underworld. Calling himself Two-Face, he became a gang leader and master criminal, starting a sweeping crime wave in Gotham. Scarring one side of Maroni's lucky coin with a knife, he made it his own memento, whole on one side, marred on the other, like himself. To decide between good and evil, this living Jekyll and Hyde now flips the coin. If it's the scarred side, Two-Face keeps the stolen loot. However, if the clean side comes face up, he donates the loot to various charities. The story ends on a cliffhanger, with Two-Face and Batman in a standoff. Oddly enough, this wasn't picked up in the next issue of Detective. Instead, the world had to wait 2 months for the conclusion, until Detective 68. This second part was called The Man Who Led a Double Life, and ended with the binary rogue finally getting caught by the dynamic duo. The Duke of Duality returned 1 year later in Detective Comics 80. This story, fittingly titled The End of Two-Face, was meant to be the final entry of the Two-Face saga, and was again written by Bill Finger and penciled by Bob Kane. In the story, Two-Face escaped captivity and resumed his two-way crimes. However, when learning that Gilda still loves him despite his appearance and has wanted him back all along, Harvey begins to have second thoughts. He eventually decides to give himself up and reform, but not before helping Batman and Robin round up the remains of his gang. And that's how it ended. Harvey paid for his crimes, had his face restored, and reunited with Gilda. The two-headed coin was given to Batman for keep in the Batcave, where it was displayed as a symbol of triumph over crime. It was a happy ending for everyone, and the saga of Two-Face was over. Or so it seemed. In reality, this was only the humble beginnings of a character who would eventually become one of Batman's biggest foes. Despite ending his criminal career, the Duke of Duality was just too good of a character to be allowed to disappear into obscurity. The creators had to bring him back, but they didn't want to ruin his happy ending. So instead, with Batman 50 published in 1948, we got the first out of a line of imposter Two-Faces. This first one was Harvey's very own butler, Wilkins. This evil counterpart to Alfred disguises himself as Two-Face, starts a new crime wave in Gotham, and blames it all on Harvey. He also drugged Harvey, made him believe he'd actually become the split-face fiend once again. However, the truth was revealed in the end, and Harvey could return to his peaceful existence with Gilda. Another very important thing of note is that this issue changed Harvey's surname from Kent to Dent. This was presumably done on part of Bill Finger wanting to differentiate the character from Clark Kent, the alias of Superman. The name Dent has been kept ever since. The second imposter appeared in Batman 68, published in 1951. This time it was an actor named Paul Sloan, set to play Two-Face in a TV movie based on a real story of the two-timing felon. While shooting the seminal courtroom scene, Sloan got his face full of real acid, as opposed to water. Turns out the prop guy was jealous of Sloan flirting with his girlfriend, so he decided to destroy his handsome face. The actor now found himself disfigured in the same fashion as the genuine Two-Face, and went mad. Looking like the Duke of Duality, and having studied his case intently, Paul Sloan began to believe that he was the real Two-Face. Thus, the confused sap set out to mimic the old crimes of the living Jekyll and Hyde. The third and final imposter appeared in Detective 187, published in 1952. This man was George Blake, the manager of a local theater. As part of an anti-crime event, Harvey Dent, alongside Batman and Robin, was set to reenact the story of Two-Face at Blake's theater. However, Blake slugged Harvey in the dressing room and secretly took his place. Then, in the guise of Harvey, in the guise of his old alter ego Two-Face, Blake attacked the dynamic duo, fled the scene, and restarted the crimes of Two-Face. Once again, Harvey took the blame, but once again, he was cleared in the end. Then finally, in 1954, came the day when the creators over at DC Comics had enough. Enough of these cheap imitators. It was time to bring back the real McCoy. This took place in David Reed and Dick Sprang's Two-Face Strikes Again, published in Batman 81. In the story, Harvey attempts to stop a pair of crooks from blowing up a safe, but is instead caught in a blast himself. This undoes his previous plastic surgery, revealing once again the dual mug of Two-Face. As a result, Harvey goes mad and resumes his supervillain career. Any hope of a blissful life for Harvey and Gilda were now shattered forever. The real Two-Face was back, and he wasn't going anywhere. Or so one could have thought. As we were getting well into the 1950s, the world of Batman was changing. Things were getting lighter and more fantastical, with the dynamic duo traveling through time and going to other planets, fighting pink aliens. Disfigured maniacs like old Splitface just didn't fit any longer. As such, his long-awaited return turned out to have been for nothing. The character of Two-Face completely dropped off the face of the earth during the Silver Age of comics, not appearing a single time for over 15 years. It seemed like this was truly the end of Two-Face. So Harvey Dent was nowhere to be seen, and the only sign that DC hadn't completely abandoned their very own Jekyll and Hyde was an issue of World's Finest Comics, published in 1968, in which Batman himself is turned into a fake Two-Face by a mad scientist. Meanwhile, Batman was exploding in popularity, especially outside of comic books. He got his own live-action TV show, a spin-off live-action movie, and a cartoon series. Many classic Batman villains made their first debuts outside comics during this era, but not Two-Face. He was just as ignored by these shows as he was by the comics. However, legendary science fiction author Harlan Ellison had written a treatment for a Two-Face episode for the live-action show in 1965. The story was greenlit, but for some reason never went into production. Thus, the Duke of Duality was robbed of what would have been his big introduction to the mainstream. The treatment was however adapted in comic form many years later in 2015 as Batman 66, The Last Episode. In a way though, Harvey's absence from the live-action show did turn out to be a blessing of sorts. The show was cancelled in 1969, and by then DC wanted nothing to do with its campy style. They were hard at work in bringing Batman back to his dark roots, and as such, refrained from using any of the villains who had appeared on the show for several years, even the Joker. Writers like Dennis O'Neil and Frank Robbins saw this as a great opportunity to introduce brand new rogues, like Ra's al Ghul and Man-Bat for example. O'Neil also got the idea to bring back a long-lost villain, one who got rejected by the TV series, namely Two-Face. His triumphant return took place in Detective Comics 234, published in 1971, 17 years after the character's last appearance. The story was called Half an Evil, and featured the pencils of legendary comic artist Neil Adams. It saw Harvey Dent back in town, up to his old duplicitous tricks once again. Following this issue, Two-Face went on to appear in numerous comics, not only in the Batman titles, but other parts of the DC universe as well, such as a Justice League two-parter in 1975 and a Teen Titans two-parter in 1977. The Titans story revealed that Duela Dent, known as the Joker's daughter, was in fact Harvey and Gilda's daughter, although this has been largely ignored since then. In Batman 258, published in 1974, Two-Face got to be the main villain in a story which featured the first appearance of Arkham Asylum. The old binary rogue was back and better than ever. He'd suddenly gone from an obscure villain to a forgotten villain to one of the biggest stars of the DC Rogues gallery. So much did he rise in popularity that he effectively replaced the Penguin as the Dark Knight's #2 foe, a rank old Pengers had claimed since his introduction in 1941. However, while Two-Face was a giant star in the world of comics, he was still completely unknown to the mainstream. The 1970s saw the launch of 2 new cartoon shows featuring Batman and Robin, Super Friends in '73 and The New Adventures of Batman in '77. Old Splitface was for some bizarre reason ignored by both of these shows, and it would be quite a while yet before Harvey Dent was finally allowed to leap off the printed page and into whole new dimensions. The living Jekyll and Hyde continued to go on strong in the comics during the 1980s, being the second most recurring foe of that decade after the Joker. His ex-wife Gilda finally returned in 1980 for a 2-parter published across Batman 328 and 329. The story ended with Harvey potentially reforming and reuniting with his old love, but subsequent stories completely dropped this thread. In 1986, Harvey appeared in the seminal arc The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. Set in a sort of future, featuring an aging and retired Batman, this landmark story, which reinvigorated the Batman brand, presented us to a rehabilitated Harvey Dent. Sane and with a whole face, Dent is released from Arkham, but it doesn't take long before he relapses into madness, sparking The Dark Knight's return. In the following year, Miller sort of reinvented the character in his classic and equally seminal Batman Year One. This story, set during Bruce Wayne's first crime-fighting year, established Harvey Dent as a supporting character before becoming a villain, something which had never been done before. In Year One, Harvey, an assistant district attorney, is portrayed as Batman's very first ally, long before Robin and even before Jim Gordon. Batman 410 and 411, also published in 1987, established 2 new Two-Face concepts. One, he was the killer of Jason Todd's father, thus setting the lad on his path to become the second Robin. And 2, the iconic giant coin in the Batcave belonged to Two-Face, as opposed to his original owner, forgotten Golden Age villain, the Penny Plunderer. Also in 1987, Paul Sloan, the second Two-Face imposter, returned after nearly 3 decades. He once again resumed his split-face alter ego and duked it out with the real version. 1989 saw the publication of yet another seminal Batman arc, namely In a Lonely Place of Dying. This story introduced us to the third Robin, Tim Drake, and featured Harvey as the main foil and Tim's trial by fire. With this, Two-Face had now established a special kind of rivalry with the Boy Wonders. Very fittingly so too, considering his own former role as Batman's original sidekick. Another major event for Harvey also took place in 1989, namely the release of the movie Batman. This, the first proper live-action Batman film, not counting the 60s TV show spin-off, finally featured, after 47 years, Two-Face's jump into another form of medium. Well, sort of. Harvey Dent appears in a small supporting role in the movie as Gotham's new DA, but he never becomes Two-Face. The man who got the honor of being the first ever performer to portray the character was Billy D. Williams, mainly known for his role as Lando Calrissian in the original Star Wars trilogy. So there we were, with the 80s coming to a close. Two-Face was the undisputed #2 of the Rogues Gallery, yet still completely unknown to the mainstream. The Batman movie did very little for the character, as most people had no idea who this Harvey Dent guy was, nor did they care. But that would all change very soon. Soon the world would, for the very first time, feast their eyes upon the double mug of Two-Face, and what an introduction it would be. Right off the bat, the 1990s continued Two-Face's streak of success in the comics. In 1990, with Batman Annual 14, the character was given a reimagined origin story. It was called The Eye of the Beholder, and was written by Andrew Helfer and penciled by Chris Sprouse. Previously, Harvey had snapped and gone bonkers first after getting disfigured, but this story went with a far more realistic approach, establishing Harvey as an already disturbed individual. He struggled with lifelong mental issues acquired due to abuse at the hands of his alcoholic father, and the stress of his job as Gotham's DA, fighting corruption on all fronts, certainly didn't help his case. It was just a matter of time before the man broke. All he needed was one final push, and that one final push was a vial of acid thrown in his face. The story also changed the origin of the two-headed coin, giving it more meaning. It was no longer Maroni's lucky piece, instead it belonged to Harvey's father, who used it in a rigged game of abuse. 2 years later came the glorious moment when Harvey was finally allowed a proper debut outside comics. Batman the Animated Series. Harvey Dent was introduced in the very first episode of this cartoon show, making a small cameo as Gotham's DA. A few episodes later, the character was given his own 2-part origin episode, which, at long last, introduced the mainstream to the Duke of Duality. It had been 50 years since the character made his debut in the comics, a half a century. This, the very first adaptation of Two-Face, took many cues from Eye of the Beholder, portraying Dent as a man on the verge of a breakdown before his disfigurement. It also introduced a new concept, namely that Harvey was close friends with Bruce Wayne, as opposed to an ally of Batman, making the living Jekyll and Hyde an even more personal foe for the Dark Knight. Richard Mole voiced the character, and he used two different voices, a normal one for Harvey and a darker, more gruff tone for his villainous alter ego. Mole was the first performer to play Two-Face, and his take has since become the gold standard that most successors choose to mimic. To this day, the animated series version of Two-Face is considered by many fans as the definitive adaptation of the binary rogue. Some even argue it surpasses the source material. During this era, Two-Face made a transition into yet another form of media, namely video games, as several games based on the animated series were released. Meanwhile, the live-action Batman film series was in full swing, with the second installment, Batman Returns, being released in 1992. It is said that Harvey Dent appeared in some early drafts of the script, and screenwriter Daniel Waters claims that he considered including Dent as a supporting character. This never came to pass though, and the character was absent from the movie, despite his role in the first film. By 1994, production on a third film, titled Batman Forever, had begun. Most of the crew from the original two installments, including director Tim Burton and Batman actor Michael Keaton, had been replaced. New director Joel Schumacher also chose to replace Billy Dee Williams with Tommy Lee Jones in the role of Harvey, who was set to appear in the film as his villainous alter ego. Batman Forever was released in 1995 and featured Jones as Two-Face alongside Jim Carrey's The Riddler. The movie skips the character's origin story, beginning immediately with a pre-established Two-Face who menaces Gotham. Two-Face had now finally been featured in a live-action film, and Batman Forever helped catapult the character into even higher levels of fame. However, most fans and critics were, and still are, very displeased with this particular version of the split-faced fiend. It lacked all the depth, complexity, and tragic qualities that Two-Face was known for in the comics and animated series. Tommy Lee Jones has also been criticized for over-the-top acting and trying to out Jim Carrey himself. A couple of video games based on Batman Forever were also released around the same time, and Harvey featured in them. Meanwhile, in the good old comics, Two-Face continued to go on strong. He was the main villain in 1994's big Batman arc, Jekyll. Set during a time when Dick Grayson, the first Robin, briefly held the mantle of the Bat, this tale had Double Mugs attempt one of his most ambitious schemes to date: tamper with Gotham's criminal records and descend the city into total chaos. This story also revealed that Dick Grayson suffered through a traumatic experience during his first encounter with Two-Face way back in the day, thus further playing up the Two-Face-Robin rivalry. 1996 saw the publication of the celebrated year-long maxi-series Batman The Long Halloween. Written by Jeff Loeb and penciled by Tim Sale, this famous story retold Two-Face's origin once again, although changed very little from Eye of the Beholder. Typically regarded among the top 5 Batman comics of all time, The Long Halloween is without a doubt the most influential Harvey Dent story. The 1990s was a very big decade for the binary rogue. He was reinvented in the comics and finally made his long-awaited debut in other forms of media. No longer was Harvey just a favorite among hardcore Batman fans, but now even your regular Joes knew the name of Two-Face. Things could have gone better with Batman Forever though, and where the mainstream was concerned, Harvey still sort of remained in the shadow of rogues like Riddler and Penguin. For Harvey Dent, the new century began with a sequel to the seminal Long Halloween, called Dark Victory. This time around, Batman's former ally turned arch-foe leads the entire rogues gallery in a war against the mob. In 2003, Harvey had his face fixed by surgeon and new villain Thomas Elliot, aka Hush. As a result, Dent seemingly joined the side of the Angels once again. But of course, nothing lasts forever. During the Face-to-Face arc, published in 2005, we learned that Batman and his allies had to leave Gotham for a whole year. With no superheroes to defend the city in their absence, Batman decided to put the reformed Harvey Dent in charge, training him in martial arts before leaving. For that entire year, Harvey served as Gotham's protector, and doing a good job at it too. But then Batman returned, and Dent was relieved from his duties. Losing any sense of purpose, and also being framed for the killings of several Bat-rogues, including Ventriloquist and KG Beast, Harvey relapsed into madness, and re-scarred half of his face himself. In 2013, the character's origin was retold once again, replacing Boss Maroney with Irish gangster Aaron McKillen, who instead of throwing acid at Harvey's face in court, comes to his house, kills his wife Gilda, and then pours acid on his face. In other forms of media during this era, the Duke of Duality appeared as a final boss in the Game Boy Color game Batman Chaos in Gotham, based on the animated series in 2001. He was featured in many other video games as well, such as the LEGO Batman series, DC Universe Online, and of course the Batman Arkham series. He also appeared in the 2008 to 2011 cartoon show Batman the Brave and the Bold, although mainly in cameos, and later in the 2013 computer animated show Beware the Batman. In the latter, Harvey Dent was introduced as an antagonistic DA, who, in the final episode, becomes Two-Face. The idea was to feature him as a supervillain in the second season, but the show was cancelled before the first season even finished airing, thus we never got to see a fully blossomed Two-Face in this series. Meanwhile, the live-action Batman film series saw its end in 1997 with the critically panned Batman and Robin. As a result, Warner Bros. Decided to relaunch the series with a complete reboot, starting over from scratch. They hired Christopher Nolan to direct and co-write what would eventually become 2005's Batman Begins. In the earlier drafts of Begins, Harvey Dent was included as a supporting character working in a DA's office. But history repeated itself, and just like with Batman Returns, Dent was cut from the final script. However, when it came time for a sequel in 2008, Harvey was indeed included. The film was called The Dark Knight and featured Aaron Eckhart in the role alongside Heath Ledger's Joker. The character spends most of the movie as Gotham's heroic and dashing district attorney, not becoming Two-Face until near the end. The focus wasn't really on Two-Face, the supervillain, but on Harvey Dent, the DA. This second live-action take on the living Jekyll and Hyde fared a lot better with fans and critics than its predecessor. It was a far more serious interpretation, more in line with the source material. However, it still failed to really boost the character's popularity. The Dark Knight's Two-Face was, in the end, completely overshadowed by the movie's main antagonist, the Joker. Dent also appeared in 2 animated movies based on Frank Miller's classic Batman comics, Year 1 in 2011 and The Dark Knight Returns Part 1 in 2012. The new century had done a lot with the old Duke of Duality, yet at the same time, not a whole lot had changed. The 1990s was a revolutionary time for the character, but the 2000s basically just gave us more of the same. We'd seen him reform and fix his face before, we'd seen much better retellings of his origin, and nothing outside the comics gave us something truly impressive, like Batman the Animated Series had done. As for Harvey Dent's most recent history, he made his live-action TV debut on the show Gotham in 2014, where he's being played by Nicholas D'Agosto. So far though, he's only appeared a handful of times on the show, and has as of yet not become Two-Face. With the series set to be cancelled after its 5th season, it seems very unlikely that D'Agosto will ever get to portray Harvey's evil alter ego. The Billy D. Williams story repeats itself. The split-faced fiend was also featured in a central role in 2016's Batman Telltale, the first entry of Telltale's Batman point-and-click game series. In the game, Harvey, Gotham's DA, is running for mayor with the help of his friend Bruce Wayne. Depending on the player's choices, it is actually possible to avert the incident that turns Dent into Two-Face. The character was voiced by Travis Willingham. 2017 saw the release of the animated movie Batman vs. Two-Face, set in the 60s TV universe. This film introduced the duplicitous loon into the world of Adam West's Batman. Unlike the comic Batman 66 The Lost Episode, this film is not based on Harlan Ellison's treatment. It is instead a brand new story, giving us a totally different take on Two-Face with a science fiction twist. This Two-Face is not mentally ill, but really 2 people sharing the same body. This came into being when Hugo Strange's evil extractor machine exploded in Harvey's face, dousing him with all the evil of Gotham. The film marked the first time Two-Face was the main villain in a movie. His voice and likeness was provided by the legendary William Shatner, aka Captain Kirk. The character has also appeared in several other animated films in small roles, including the LEGO Batman movie, Batman Gotham by Gaslight, and Batman Ninja. In 2017, Two-Face was also featured in an episode of the cartoon show Justice League Action, in which his split personality was played up to great comedic effect. He was voiced by Robert Picardo. And currently, this is where we're at with the old coin flipper. So, Batman's number 2 rogue. Although is he really that anymore? It feels like he's been dethroned in recent years, possibly by the Riddler or maybe Bane. He just isn't as prominent in the comics as he used to be, nor does he hold as much importance. Two-Face was a crucial villain in the 1980s and 90s, being featured in many landmark stories, while now he mostly just appears in cameos. Scott Snyder and John Romita Jr.'s All-Star Batman arc, My Own Worst Enemy, from 2016 may have reinvigorated him a bit, but I don't know if it was enough. So what does the future hold for the living Jekyll and Hyde? Where I think he needs no improvement is in animation. With the classic Batman the Animated Series and now Batman vs. Two-Face, he's doing great in that department. Many people will probably say he's doing fine in movies too, but personally I still don't think we've gotten the definitive live-action Two-Face movie yet. Here's hoping the rumor of Harvey Dent appearing alongside the Penguin in Matt Reeves' upcoming Batman movie is true. I would have said that he has it really bad in video games, but then we got Batman Telltale. I still think Two-Face needs to have a major role in a more traditional action game though. And that leaves comics. He was doing really great for decades, but it's been a bit iffy in modern times. Not terrible, but he has fallen slightly since the glory days. So, which version of the binary felon is your favorite? The animated series, Batman Forever, The Dark Knight, the Telltale game, William Shatner? Let me know in the comments. Next up in this series will be The Penguin, and after that, I'm thinking of going outside Gotham City, possibly starting with Green Lantern's nemesis, Sinestro. Anyway, as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.